I'm Dennae and part of the Surge leadership team, and it's great to have you guys here in Phoenix with us.
Great to be here.
Welcome to the Valley of the Sun. We've been hearing a lot about Banquet and Brave Cities, and just excited about the work that you guys are doing. I would love to, hear a little bit of your stories and how you came about to living where you're living and the ways in which you're moving through your vocations and your work as part of your mission with Jesus. So tell us, maybe Hugh, tell us a little bit about you and what you're up to.
Yeah, we've been in a little town called Alton, Illinois, for about 8 years. We've been planting in Portland, Oregon, and Denver prior to that, and we just ended up there because we were following our son's disability journey there. He ended up at a assisted living center out in Alton. It's about 25 minutes north of St. Louis, and we just obviously we would go visit him a lot, and we just found ourselves being intrigued by this town that looked pretty busted up. Ended up, sniffing around and realizing it was a very impoverished area, about half black, half white context, just north of St. Louis, and a lot of boarded up commercial spaces, a lot of, just typical blight. They had lost about 2/3 of their population. And on probably the 10th trip in, my wife said, why don't we just move here and see if we can do something to help the town? And so that's why we got over there. Our adult children joined us, so kind of the whole family went out there. And in a really weird set of circumstances, a gentleman that I barely knew gave me a building in the middle of downtown. And we just started to, not so much thinking about planting a church. We just started to think about what would the kingdom response be to the city. And that became kind of the beginning of my connection with Taylor, who had been doing the same type of what we call kingdom ecosystem building in Birmingham, Alabama. And I was just looking for help. I didn't, we had kind of an idea of what we wanted to do, what we felt like maybe the Lord would do. We felt like he would want to have a cup of coffee like we were trying to find. And I didn't know anything about coffee, so I called this guy and found out about not just coffee, but a very extensive kingdom ecosystem that their family had been working on. And so we became close friends and allies, and that was really the story. But we built out what we call Post Commons, and it became kind of an apostolic hub, convergent space, kind of what we call the living room for the whole town. There was no daytime space, nowhere to meet, hang out, and we became kind of the premier event space in town and co-working space, and a lot of different businesses and justice works and kind of intentional efforts began to kind of incubate out of that. So we became an incubator for what we call good works, and set up a nonprofit holding company for LLCs, and that was the beginning of just going, okay, God's doing very creative things. And the way we looked at it, we said it's not what would a normal church would look like, but it was an ecosystem of all sorts of good kingdom works and activity. And that's why we kind of frame the idea of kingdom ecosystems.
Maybe. So Lance, I've got to know you through your brother, who was planting a church, and it was always really interesting, even from the beginning, that you were engaged in the business and marketplace, and starting the coffee shop, and maybe 42 other things. But talk a little bit, maybe even like hearing Hugh, what would you say is some of like the paradigm differences between like planting a church and using your vocation, marketplace work as part of a kingdom ecosystem, and how might churches think about those who maybe are planting a church, kind of think through this other paradigm?
Well, for me, what we realized was when we planted the church, we planted with the coffee shop, which was a for-profit coffee shop. We wanted it to be a part of a community, but that became a springboard for multiple other businesses, benevolent businesses in the community. And we realized it was actually just as much a part of the song as this. And in fact, in some ways, it was even more effective. I mean, specifically for me, that might not be everybody's calling, but we found out that even if you were to take a map of the people in our room that would come here and worship with us on Sundays, their experience and what they're getting in church, everything that's offered here is offered out there also. But for some reason, we've kind of programmed it and said it all has to happen here. And so we kind of realized that we're out there building businesses. This is where the discipleship was actually happening, both for me too, even. I was learning out there. And then also basically that the other thing that was happening was while we were building businesses, an increasing number of, we'll call them leaders, kingdom leaders, but maybe disenfranchised with the church, we were meeting that wanted to connect with Jesus, still cared about the kingdom, but didn't know how. And that this specific model, the more traditional church model, somehow had failed them or wasn't working for them. And so, but they were going, but we still care. And so essentially, in some ways, the kingdom ecosystem is a way of helping people step into the kingdom of God and see all of life and all of business life, work life, home life as a conduit for the kingdom.
So unpack a little more when you say, for people who don't know, aren't familiar with the phrase kingdom ecosystem, when you say everything happening within a traditional four-wall Sunday church service is happening out there, like what kind of things would you say would be that you were discovering are happening, maybe even more potently through the work that you were doing in the marketplace? What would some of those things be?
I might want to pass the baton to Taylor on that one.
Awesome.
Not because I can't answer it, but I think that he wrote the book on it. So Hugh and Taylor, just want to give them the first crack at that.
Well, one thing that Hugh said was, how did you phrase it? You said it might not look like the normal church. And I would agree with that, but I would say it does look like the ancient church. And we always say that, one of our secrets is we're not really doing anything new. We're just trying to rediscover what has been done. We think that the people of God have always functioned as an ecosystem. From the garden to the cities of refuge in the Old Testament to the Church of Acts in the New Testament to what we will see when it's all said and done. There's going to be this, seems to be a really beautiful city called the New Jerusalem that we'll get to be a part of. And that's been the common, consistent narrative of how the church works and functions. And that really embodies what we all dream of this idea of the priesthood of all believers. A small critique on the normal church or kind of the paradigm of church that we have right now is it really is centered on kind of the shepherd teacher model. And there's little programs for people where they can get involved and whatnot. But we would just say that idea or that paradigm or that model can exist within what we call a kingdom ecosystem. And the kingdom ecosystem is just the people of God functioning in everyday life together, singing the song that God is giving them, architecting the spaces that God is designing through them. And here's how we frame it, Dennae, in the book: building the tables or curating the tables that they can invite seekers to come and experience the good news of Jesus. Particularly, we would say with a leaning towards the poor, the outcast, the sick, the leper, as Jesus says in Luke 10. So it is nothing new. It's nothing remarkably innovative, but what it is it's an expansion of the idea of what the people of God and how they were meant to function.
Here's just to riff off of Dennae's questions. What would we experience out in this type of an ecosystem that we wouldn't experience in like a church gathering? I mean, that's just popcorn, but I just think about the ability to even tell people the whole story of God. I mean, it's probably been 200 people just within our coffee shop that have literally come to me and went, "Hey, I heard there's something going on here that's kind of different." And literally, they just ask, "Can you explain why you guys are doing this or what you're doing?"
But that's the thing, not just Hugh now.
Yeah.
Our baristas, our bartenders, our patrons, some of our inner core, what a common organization or church would think of as like a core leadership team will frequent these spaces like a local pub or a coffee shop or um, a gym that we might start or help start, a youth athletic facility, a boutique woodworking and retail space, a yoga studio, homes throughout our community that we kind of intentionally move into to place ourselves sort of in the most vulnerable or the most needed areas for good news. And then those homes somehow become almost like, not to sound too cliche, but they become like little cities on a hill where somehow men and women living on the streets or youth that are from broken homes know to go to these homes to find a meal or to find a ride to school if they've missed the bus or to find someone to talk to when they're in a really kind of precarious situation. And so all of a sudden, these over the years, these tables start to become kind of created out of this economy, this shared economy of we're all in this together. And now it's not just Hugh sharing every Sunday for 45 minutes, but it's literally hundreds of people that are placing themselves in specific and certain. Again, anyone hearing this would go, yeah, that kind of sounds like my faith community. And we would go, yeah, this isn't some radically innovative idea, but it is important to recognize. We were recently at a large denominational gathering in Los Angeles, and one of the sessions we really focused in on, it's important to recognize that all things are sacred, but we can't have any sacred cows in the kingdom ecosystem. And the Sunday service has become a sacred cow in Western evangelicalism. It's a big thing. Then everything else is kind of like, sure, go to the coffee shop and meet people, or maybe do a missional community thing on a Wednesday night, or go help feed the hungry. But those are all side things. The big thing is, and we would say, no, if you gather in a large group on Sundays to hear maybe teaching from the scriptures or to sing some songs about Jesus, that's wonderful. That's a table within the ecosystem.
So maybe two questions. One would be, let's say I'm not a pastor, I don't want to plant a church, but it sounds like you're talking about being a disciple of Jesus and living out your faith, in all areas of your life. And so you're going to have different people who might have, various callings, vocations, industries they're in that are hopefully this beacon on a hill. But what would you, and so in some ways what you're describing isn't, like you said, isn't radical, and yet it is radical. And it is actually a very distinct and all encompassing way to live your life. And so what would you say are some of the, oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
What would you say some of like the existing kind of barriers and blind spots that maybe an average person like me might go to a church and have that desire and even maybe those instincts, but their time and attention gets oriented towards something other than the outward love of neighbor and building of, creating community out of your home or whatever your gift mix is. What are some of those kind of things that we do unintentionally in the church or even as a volunteer in a church that maybe takes us away from living that
Well,
kind of
think
life
of it
we're
like
being
this,
towards?
and then Lance, I think you might have had something, but let me respond by just like painting a picture of what if Jesus came, the incarnation happened, and his ministry began, and basically everything was modeled after what we see now. So he went um, into Nazareth, into Jerusalem, into Judea, wherever he was, and he gathered a large group of people to hear him talk and tell wisdom and teach doctrine and understanding of God. And that was his model. I think what we would see is a lot of what we're seeing now. We would see a lot of people coming to hear what he had to say, and then trying to invite more people to come and hear what he had to say. But he modeled something really specific for us. He said, "Come with me. I'm going to the hurting and the lost and the lonely and the poor. And let's go tell them good news. Let's invite them into life and into good news." And he went and incarnated himself and taught others. He sent men and women out, and he said, "Go into these places and bring peace there and heal the sick and cleanse the leper, bring good news." And so I guess, again, you guys jump in, but the way I'm trying to frame it is it's so we've 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 in a sense gotten so far away from what he taught us. And then at the end, when he was leaving in Matthew 28, he said, "Now go and continue to teach the things that I taught." And we slowly kind of returned back to some sort of temple system. And I think he honored that. I think he honored a gathering where he could pontificate the goodness of God, but it was equal to the rhythms of his everyday life.
I think like when you just say good news, though, I still think what people will hear now is like, well, we're all everybody supposed to go out and tell people the good news. What we're trying to say within the Brave Cities sort of story is that the good news are also works that we do. And so if we go into Alton and we go, there's no daytime space for people to connect, then to bring good news to Alton is to actually create the business that allows people to come and gather and connect. If we find out, as we did, that 75% of our youth are fatherless in Alton, then we don't just go out and proclaim good news on the corner. We go out and we create a basketball league for those fatherless kids, and we tell them that you now have dads. So
There's no travel basketball league available or even affordable for young people in Alton. So instead of just pontificating good news, we wanted to create spaces of good news.
Well, and inclusive spaces. So the entire traditional church package right now, if most people are honest and think about it, most churches are creating a space that's exclusively for Christians. Atheists don't walk in here for no reason. I mean, you might get a little bit of that, but for the most part, you're lying to yourself if you think that the Sunday package is it. And so, like, the idea of the banquet in scriptures is that we need to be creating inclusive spaces for everybody. And so, like, if you were to, the people watching this can't see this, but Axiom sits in a downtown area that's been a ghost town for 30 years. If we were to take out the Brave City element, it would just be a Sunday service.
Yep.
But because we've started benevolent businesses and intentional homes in the neighborhood, we can actually literally walk out these doors and point to 4 businesses and about 12 more coming, all on this strip. We've actually turned the lights on in the whole city, and that is church. All of that is just as much church as Sunday.
And what I love about churches that do that model is that then also, if you are gonna have a building and a place, it becomes a place for the neighborhood, whether they're here Sundays or not. So it becomes an inclusive place that again, you were talking about a third what did you call the home, like a gathering spot.
Yeah, convergent space.
Convergent space.
We even, and took this from you guys really, but this cross is the only thing that even looks Christian in this building, and even that's modular and can be taken down. Not because we want to take down crosses, but because we want this to be a living room for the city. Like you said, we want it to be for anybody. And that is a signifier to other people that says, whoa, wait a minute, I'm in a space that maybe isn't mine. Is maybe
A lot of the whole, like, if you take one scripture to try to frame this entire conversation, is Proverbs 11:10, where the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. So the reason why the ecosystem idea is so important is that, yes, for sure, the things that we create, the works that we create, the restaurants, the whatever they are tables, they're places people connected with us, but they're also places that just bless the city. Even coming out here today, I took a little breather in the sun because it's freezing back in St. Louis, and was sitting out there. Most of the people that were out at essentially you have a park that's, a part of this network, and people just from the city are coming in and hanging out with their kids. So it's not always that it's just about connecting with the Jesus people. It's that you literally want the town to go, man, we're glad you guys showed up. And if you guys ever left, we'd be lost here in this town. So that's the plumb line of what a Christian presence should have been. Like if we had taken all these people going to hear people talk about God and we had said, no, the whole game is that we all go out and we create things that bless our city, I think our entire street cred of the Christian movement would be radically different than it is today.
I think there's also a huge component of what's happening that you guys aren't naming that's maybe assumed. And it's probably the most powerful part. And I think that a lot of times when we talk about incarnating Christ and doing what Jesus did, um, there's actually this beautiful thing that we have that Christ didn't, and that we have built in brokenness in us. And yet somehow Christ, as the perfect model of love, still demonstrated the capacity to receive and expose his need. And so you have these different pictures, especially the vulnerable and the margins, pouring out their offerings and giving to him and him receiving. And I think that it's not just that we're creating and doing things in a community or in a neighborhood, but when you create it so that it's not just because I think that kind of is partly some of the, like, transactionalism that we're trying to leave behind from,
Right.
what we've inherited maybe, and so when you create a business that has coffee tables, you're actually creating a platform and a space for the Christ and the creativity that's already existing in this neighborhood, with or without us being present here, coming to fruition and coming to light, and we're actually calling out the God-given gifts and creativity that's already here in these neighborhoods, and you're creating platforms and spaces and networks and basketball teams for that to converge and really be visible in that community. And so I think there's a lot of whatever the church models that people take and whatever your role is, of this idea, like, what does it mean to live into radical reciprocity, where we're not just bringing the good news, but we're seeing the good news that's already present and hidden, and actually naming it in others and in the communities that we're around. And I think that that's something that, especially, in some ways, I think official clergy and the models we have for who does the ministry is pretty limited in what their role is and what their roles are. And yet, if you're an everyday person with a job or work in a neighborhood, in a city, in a school, you have nonstop, you're interacting with people all the time, but you get to see something in them that actually might need to disciple you, whether they have faith or not, that you're seeing something of God's love and character present in who God made them to be. And we're inviting that into this exchange. And that's what I love about the idea even of a banquet, of just this table where we're all bringing different meals and sharing together. And there's something being created that's very,
I would even say it's just actually more effective at helping people get into the primary space that Jesus pointed to, the kingdom of God. I think that in the traditional church model, we're selling the kingdom short, and people meet Jesus and they get inspired, but it's not a very effective way of helping them live out the kingdom life. And so I love what you guys talk about in the book with the bear. So if you could help people have that close shave again.
Well, we'll whet the appetite so they'll go buy the book to read the story. But the idea is just that in order to make anything palatable or available to the masses, especially something as radical as Jesus, we got to domesticate him. And we had a family experience a couple of years ago when we were out west in one of the parks, and we were looking for a bear. And this was kind of a 3-day journey of me and my wife and our 5 kids really trying to find a bear in the wild. And the short Cliff's Notes versions of the story is we did it. We found one, and it was this incredible experience of seeing this grizzly bear and her 2 cubs. It was about 400 yards from us, but there was a group of people that had pulled over on the side of the road just to marvel at this wild animal that we all knew could kill us in a moment if we got too close. And I'll let the book kind of break down the marvel of it all. But the next day was really when the magic happened, because we left the park, and on our way out of town, we saw a sign for a bear and wolf exhibit, and we were just dumbfounded. Like, we've been looking so hard to find a single bear, to see because I'd never seen a bear before. And now all we got to do is go to this place and pay $7 a piece, and we get to see a bear up close. So we did. We went, and it was so disappointing and such a huge letdown. Even though we were in person with the bear, there was nothing separating us except for a 20-foot kind of gully.
Moat.
Yeah, a moat with no water in it. And so what was interesting is, one, all my kids grew bored of the bear super quickly. Like within 30 seconds, they looked at it. There was no real wild experience to it. And they went to play on the playground. But my youngest, my daughter, she preferred the bear exhibit. She said, I feel safer here. The other stuff was scary. And on the way out of the bear exhibit, after, throwing away $40, I told my wife that I just feel like this is what we've done. Jesus is wild, and he's sometimes very hard to find. And he does say, if you seek me with your whole heart, you'll find me, but he doesn't say you'll always find me. He indicates that if you seek me half-heartedly, you won't find me. So what I feel like we have done, especially church planters, is we've built bear exhibits. And we allow people to come in once a week to pay their dues and to get a quick glimpse at a domesticated Jesus. And the truth is it's boring. It's not inspiring to virtually anyone. They enjoy it because they all do it together. Community's a beautiful thing, but it doesn't call them into anything radical or risky or in need of faith. There's virtually no need of faith. And we go out, especially those of us who have encountered Jesus in the wild, and we go, that was not the same Jesus. There was a similar sense and a shape and a figure, but somehow he seems like he's in a cage there. And I would say, kind of be so bold to say, at least our intention of Brave Cities is to call people back into the radical pursuit of the wild Jesus.
What's strange is I think our pastors and leaders know this better than our parishioners even do. I think they're struggling behind the scenes and are even growing tired.
Absolutely. That's right.
And probably want and have good intentions. And then there's good here. I'm not saying there's not good here either, but I think that they're held down at the zoo when they're the expert that really should be leading people out of the zoo and into the wild,
Well, unfortunately, Lance, and I know I can say this with confidence because we have so many brothers in this position, but unfortunately, a lot of them, their livelihood is dependent on that bear exhibit running well. And they don't know what else to do now because they've built their kind of stability and security on that exhibit being better than the other exhibit down the street. And to abandon that and to call people out of that would, in a sense, be to sacrifice their own career. That's a tough calling. But here's the hybrid, and here's the hope for any pastor out there, any church planter, is we still have freedom to cultivate those spaces. Consider we're sitting in a church gathering space right now that I've been to and I find to be beautiful, and I would come here if I lived here. It's a table though, and it has no business being propped up as more vital or more essential than the pub down the street.
I think it's probably even an additional layer, I would say, is there's the financial livelihood component. There's also something in the church membership and the clergy, the role of the pastor, that there is a sense of safety and security in a leader, a person, or a handful of leaders modeling and demonstrating the way of Jesus. And so where we know we fail and fall short, we can expect our leaders not to. And then, there's something to be said of the kind of confidence you have to have in your faith and godliness to say, I'm going to take a role that does have an expectation and I'm not saying that, I mean, scripture does talk about teachers being held accountable, and so I'm not saying it doesn't matter how we live, but we have a system that does ask for that allows most church members to be okay living unholy, shame-filled lives while our pastors act like they don't have that going on.
Yeah.
And that can happen in the missional church model. I remember being in my 20s with the young kids trying really hard to do hospitality 4 days a week out of my house and saving my fights with my husband till whenever the last 20-year-old decided to leave. And so the ability to live freely and authentically in relationship, there's structures and systems like what you're talking about that make it's a lot harder to live a hidden life when you got people coming in and out of your living room all the time. So that's for sure a lot harder. It's not impossible. It's a lot harder. And then the structure of the church does actually, it's not just the pastors that are upholding it. The people are let off the hook. The people get a what did you call it, domesticated Jesus by asking there to be only a few radicals. When we actually say we're all called to be radicals, and that has to fit and look based on our particular gifts and unique callings and family stages in life. But whatever that looks like, there is no hierarchy. There's no God's holy chosen ones who have to live just like Jesus and the rest of us who are following them, but we're all kind of living this life, and we're living it really brokenly. And so how do we create the community and the space with both each other as Christians and with our everyday neighbors to be very honest about the reasons why we're walking around with shame and need to practice confession and living into this life and pattern of forgiveness and community. So there's something that I think is really appealing about the authenticity that's possible in a missional church model, what you guys are doing, if there really is this sense of we're going to live as equals and be really aware of the brokenness in which we do it and the invitation we have to receive what we need from the Spirit through all these people that God's put in our neighborhood and our community and our lives.
Go ahead, bro.
When you think back to the frontier movement here, what people might remember despite all of the negative stuff of it, what you remember in the films we see and the books that we've read, the history of it, is it when people were pioneering or frontiering into a new area of the country to start a new city, it was such an inspiring experience, and everyone felt like they had a role. Everyone felt like they were swinging a hammer or digging or blacksmithing or something. Everyone was a part of this ecosystem being established and architected and dreamt about. And we say a lot that we don't necessarily think that we can change our cities. We don't think we can change Phoenix, but we think we can build a better city within Phoenix, and that is what the people of God have always been called to do.
And everyone having a role in the community, in downtown Peoria, becoming the best of what it can be.
Yep.
Is very different than having a role in sustaining a local church. And that's not to diminish the role of the local church, but they're two different paradigms, what you're calling your people into.
They're very different paradigms.
Last night we hosted about 40 people or whatever. And I was surprised because I knew the fabric of those people and kind of who the leaders were in the room. But a lot of them brought their significant others and maybe their partner, their wives that are less seen in the leadership role, but it was them actually that responded even heavier than I think the leaders. Like they were feeling called to action and through it. And we had conversations with a lot of them after. Some of them hit me up saying, hey, not only am I in, but my wife is wanting in now. And I'm going, bro, that's awesome.
Because they're hearing language and experiencing a spirit that says you're just as much a part. Again, the local church model is built on a leadership paradigm. Who are the leaders? A city is not a frontier city. It's everyone together. Sure, we appoint and recognize certain figures to maybe legislate or govern, but at its purest state, everyone knows that they're all kind of carrying the wood together. But when the paradigm is, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Jesus said, if you seek me with your whole heart, you will find me. Well, we've said to him, actually, we don't need to anymore. We got you here in this space, and every Sunday we're going to lift the curtain and let everybody come and look at you. And they don't really have to seek you at all. That doesn't sound right. Something sounds off there.
Yeah, and I would say even not just the church, but the American dream is built on being able to continually produce and consume in ways that are very transactional. And so I do think there's also this real thinness and like innate dissatisfaction with being part of this continual transactional system, and a lot of invitation for people to be part of something very meaningful and sacrificial. That the widows might, if all you, or the 5 loaves and the 3 fish, or the 2 fish, 5 loaves, whatever it is that we have to bring to the collective. I think they're really, especially post-COVID, most of our neighbors are, when we this idea of everyone can be a part of something, of building and creating something, that's beneficial for the community. I think that there's a real hunger in that. And in some ways, I think that's probably, when we think of the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. There's probably, the harvest is filled with workers, but there's not even the capacity or the structures a lot of times in place to unlock those paradigms for our neighbors and our community. And so I love the work that you guys are doing, and just the way you've integrated. So it's not just the businesses, but you've integrated all these different ways in which community can happen. And so there's a lot of different contexts that people can kind of fit into, whether it's a basketball team or a family meal, is really powerful.
It's really at to maybe frame the whole thing right now, Dennae, this, the primary conversation within church leadership has been about discipleship, right? Like, and that's really all we're talking about. We would say that the consumer model of church does not really create, if a disciple is somebody that lives the life that Jesus lived, then we're really just saying, this ancient model, as Taylor said, it has to be something where you are fully involved with your entire life. And I just think, as much as we as pastors want to see that delivered, like we want to say to people from a pulpit, go do this stuff, the reality is most people have never built muscles of kingdom artistry. They don't know what to do. And so when you create like a playing field, that's what an ecosystem is. When you create a playing field of benevolent business and justice works and intentional homes, now you have options for people, and that's how they are actually discipled. They see it, they participate, they might even have a job in it, and over time they grow. And for sure, as the leaders or facilitators of that, you have to grow. You can't hide behind it. I knew Lance was having a rough month with business, and I just said as we were driving, how has that affected your marriage? Like, just your, and that's what this is. When you're doing life, it's all discipleship.
And maybe that's, okay, so one of our prayers, we'd love to see 1,000 of these kind of communities started in Phoenix in the next 5 years, 10 years. So there's a huge prayer to see what's happening here in Peoria and different parts of our city, to become not just a once here and there kind of model, but just to permeate our city.
Yeah.
And a lot of our churches are in these existing models of where they're maybe 50 years in to a church being that way. And I would say, actually, whenever I've been tempted to be discouraged or disappointed by some of the unhealthy fruit that I think a lot of our pastors have wrestled with, some of the unhealthy fruit we've seen come out of the church, that there's always this consistent drumbeat of the beautiful that comes unintentionally. So no matter how broken a church is, community happens. There's always people who find each other in a small group who become lifelong. They might end up at 3 different churches. They might be best friends for 30 years. And so in some ways, for the healthiest versions of the existing church, that if you're stewarding a church community in an existing model, some of it is even just celebrating the things that we don't even name. So we're talking about how many members are coming, baptisms, like the visible works of this model. But there's all kinds of these everything you're naming. It might not be happening as strongly or as intentionally, but it is happening in a church of 100 or 1,000. And the more that pastors and leaders can see it and name it, as a fruit and an outcome of what it means to follow Jesus, and for our church to be freeing up people to live out their mission, it does actually help there be more intentionality. And so even if you don't have this model, to shine light on the things that are very organic and are coming out of your church members just naturally living their life in community, following Jesus, maybe around whatever non-Christian friends they have. I think that's one way that churches can begin to integrate this, even if their model doesn't allow it. And hopefully, in the years to come, we can seed these new models being a much more powerful part of what's happening in the ecosystem.
I think that for the churches to thrive, they're going to have to start, though, to figure out how to allocate some of the money that comes in and shift it from coming from the parishioners to actually becoming seed funding for benevolent business. And that could be a way that they can start to experiment and flirt with this. What you guys talk about, the archaeological work of building a kingdom ecosystem, where we have to stop and actually dream and think about what are the actual felt needs, what are the types of things we need to do in this area. And I think if churches started to even just shift that way a little bit.
Well, so the way forward, we all know that the church as we know it is ending. The data is pretty heavy in the favor of
Decline. Yeah.
massive decline.
Yeah.
Like we've never seen in the history of this story of kind of gathering centric church. The way forward, I think, and what we're working hard on is to see the current model of church shift to becoming an incubator for business, justice works, intentional homes all throughout neighborhoods and communities, that we allow generosity to come in, but we slowly and sort of aggressively move away from that generosity funding salaries and operations, and we move into it funding businesses, funding startups, funding creative and innovative missional ideas all throughout our context.
Yeah, but I mean, the subtitle of Brave Cities is the archaeology, artistry, and then architecture. What we don't want to see, though, is that churches just have money go, oh, let's just try some things. The archaeology is the kingdom piece. It's the digging. And you can't dig unless you're present. So we hope that people don't see this as just like a way to start cool things. This is literally like you have to ask people to live in a neighborhood for a while and dig and find the vines of Babylon that have grown over the kingdom, pull that stuff back. And if, yeah, in our setting, yeah, we renovate a building because it's been boarded up for 60 years. And then we become artists. Now we start creating things that make sense to the city, make sense to what's broken. And then later we add a little, sort of architecture. So we backfill with I guess the financial structures and the spiritual formation structures.
And that's about a 10-year process for us.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I love the pace even of that. And I think even Hugh, when we were talking yesterday too, what struck me is I love the language of ecosystem, because so many things are happening at once. Old things are dying, new things are being birthed. Things are being seeded that will never take root. Other things will be around 200 years from now. And so there's also the reality of we're not just shifting models or praying for these new expressions because something's dying. There's a lot of leaders in our networks who are going to be stewarding institutions and organizations that are sunsetting in the next 1 to 2 generations. And that's not failure in a relationship to an ecosystem where they're doing hospice work while new things are starting. And these things are in a dynamic relationship with each other, where I've seen there be such a impediment to mission in cities for so long is how these groups begin to polarize. What's the new best thing, and and you can begin to have all these theological debates, and it's actually both and all are happening right now. And in the next, whether it's 10 years or 100 years, as these models are shifting to reach brand new cultures and contexts in our globalized cities, and youth with worldviews we can't even for 5 minutes fully immerse ourselves in and stay sane. It's just such a different world that there's this sunsetting and redistributing of finances, people, ideas into the new. And the new isn't always better. God is calling a whole group of leaders into the new, and there's people who are stewarding the old and
Well,
and have a responsibility to do what you're saying, is to begin to shift and think through how do we do that in the most effective way.
I think a lot of pastors are going to see it as a lifeline. Again, I think that the more common story that we're hearing and that we're experiencing everywhere we go is we don't know what to do. But we don't want to do this. And so as that sort of forced change, you said whether it's 10 years or 100 years, I think it's going to be a lot closer to 10 years. I think out of desperation comes innovation. And as that desperate moment starts to hit more and more church leaders, they're going to be excited to go, okay, now we can innovate something new, something maybe not new historically, but new for them, while trying to keep alive this beautiful little thing that we have here on Sundays or Thursdays or whenever. But recognizing that, because it takes a really, really bullheaded person to push against that paradigm, to go, you know what, I'm not gonna find validation and success anymore and how good my Sunday gathering is, how many baptisms I have, how many newsletters I can write saying this is the impact that we've had on in our ministry this year. I'm just going to cultivate the garden that God has given me and see if an ecosystem could come out of it in a shared economy. And I think I'll book in this whole statement with, I just think a lot of pastors are going to see this moment as a lifeline, this sunsetting, as you call it.